buyer horror stories, some spring market updates, some mortgage predictions. How many people are actually thinking about purchasing homes this year? My name is Gino D'Angelo, and I'm coming to you live from downtown Petoskey, where I speak with you directly, live, in color, every 7 p.m. on Thursday. My videos release every Sunday at 1 p.m. and then every Thursday at 7, I come live to answer your questions directly, have a conversation about what's going on in the market, and do my best to deliver you the highest quality real estate news in Northern Michigan. And whether you're watching this live or, as a lot of you do, watching the recording, I am super grateful that you're here. Super grateful for your support. If you have not yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and you'll never miss one of these videos. As always, before we get started, just want to give you a quick welcome and let me know where you're from. I like to hear where my viewers are watching from, where our reach is going, where people are even considering moving here from. If you might notice, if you watch these every week, we've got a little bit new of a setup. We got a new camera for the live and we had a new microphone. So I should have better, you should be able to see me better and hear me better, and growing the channel and making better videos, better equipment. All of that has been a lot of fun. So before we get into it, let's see what any questions we have. Dewan Jordan coming in from Detroit, Screenville, South Carolina. Great. Thanks guys for watching. Make sure this is meant to be an interactive. The reason I do these lives is so we can have an interactive conversation. Last week, we got off on the topic of somehow we were talking about Italian food and four-wheeling and getting stuck in the mud and that sort of thing. So I never quite know where these lives are going to go or what kind of conversations we're going to have. So if you have any questions related to Northern Michigan real estate, or real estate in general, a lot of the advice I give you about buying or selling a home in these lives is transferable to anywhere. Ian's coming in from Traverse City as always. Thanks for watching, Ian. If anybody, quick shout out, if anybody needs a mortgage, Ian Ashton of One O Trust is the person for you. Jeffrey Morgano, always tuning in. Thanks, guys. Hope Nicole's there with you. It's been a great, I actually was just talking to Jeff and his wife. It seems like this week I realized that the spring market is actually starting. I think we're actually outside of the winter market. Now, why is that? It's not because of the weather, because we did lose a lot of snow, but it's still very cold here today. I was out showing houses all afternoon and it was freezing. But what I mean by it's becoming the spring market is sellers are starting to be a lot less interested in negotiating than they were a short while ago, meaning the prospect of the spring market is upon us, and sellers have a new sense of encouragement and they think the spring market's going to come. So maybe they can hold out just a little bit longer and catch that wave of buyers that are going to be coming. And we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, but there is a ton of pent up demand, at least according to statistics. We have a very big business, but we were just going through our list of buyers, just our buyer pipeline, like any salesperson would do. And we have a ton of people that we've had conversations with about buying a home this year. And will all of them buy a home? Probably not. But if me, as one of 500 realtors in Northern Michigan, has a giant list of people that are at least mildly interested in buying a home, then I think there's a lot of others out there too. So Steve Hall coming in from Portland, Oregon. Thanks for tuning in, Steve. I really appreciate the support. So a couple of things before we get into it tonight, I wanted to share with you. Gaylord has broken the record for the new record of snow with 185 inches of snow this year. I was really curious, and I still am to an extent, really curious if they could get to 200 inches this year, which I think would be incredible. I don't know if they will. Now, 15 inches isn't really that much. It's a little over a foot. We've got some warm weather coming. It snowed a little bit last night. So this is probably even. I think this is from the end of February. So will Gaylord, drop a comment below. Do you think Gaylord is going to hit 200 inches of snow this year? And if they do, even with the record they're at now, I think it's going to be a long time before that record is broken. Although you'll often see in sports, somebody will break a record that stood for 50 years and then the next year somebody else breaks it. So genuinely curious if this is just how winter is, or if this was an anomaly and it was sort of a 1 year off. Again, drop your comments in the chat if you have any questions about anything we talk about, anything we've talked about before. we're getting to the point where we've done enough of these that some things come up from last week or some questions watching last week's video. But again, if you're watching this live, great. Say hi. Be good to hear from you. If you're watching the replay, also drop a comment and let me know if you're watching the replay, and we'll hop into it. One thing is, let me add this to the stage. Mortgage rate predictions. Let me have this banner so we can see it. The Mortgage Brokers Association, Wells Fargo, and Fannie Mae have predictions of the interest rates this year. We're just about through Q1, so it looks like it's right at 6.9, 6.9. Wells Fargo thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but just under 7%, which I'll let Ian weigh in how accurate that ended up being. If you look at Q2 of 2025, it looks like it's going to adjust down just a little bit and stay very similar. It's going to adjust down again. So it looks like the second half of this year could be, as far as interest rates go, a good time to buy. Now, does that mean you shouldn't buy if you're looking at the beginning of this year? Of course not, because what I trade, I hate the saying date the rate, marry the house, but if you buy now and rates drastically drop, you're going to own the house a very short amount of time before you're able to refinance. So Ian's just weighed in. Today we were right about 6.75 for national average. That's actually really low. And I've noticed an uptick of buyers lately. And I think it's a little bit, and Ian and I have been talking about this a lot. I think we're going to see, it feels like it's going to be the perfect storm. I think this is why it's going to be a good spring. I think first and foremost, we have not, and it's impossible to quantify the effect that this weather, we go right from talking about Gaylord breaking a record for snowfall into the spring market. The amount of snow that we had in northern Michigan certainly prevented people from coming here to look at houses, because we sold a handful of houses this winter to people that needed houses. And then there are people that needed to sell their house, and everything worked out well. I think there's a lot of pent up demand. One, interest rates are starting to come down, which is great. Two, I think there's a lot of pent up demand from the winter because people simply didn't want to drive to northern Michigan to look at houses. And three, I think there's going to be some inventory. In fact, I had two separate buyers yesterday send me houses from Zillow, because that's where everybody looks. Look, we've got a great website. We send out properties, but everybody still likes to use Zillow, which is fine. When I'm in a town and I want to see a town that I don't cover and I want to see what the houses cost, I get the Zillow app out because you can use the map feature and it's great. But anyways, they sent me these listings from Zillow, and it shows you the history. It shows you, so you can go back and look for as long as it was recorded. It shows what the house is currently listed at, any price reductions, and what they paid for it. And somebody sent me a house that was listed at 405. And I looked back, and in 2021, those people paid 400 for the house. Now, that is certainly still more expensive. 405 is still more than 400. But if you back out what it's going to cost them to sell that house, which a rough estimate is 8 to 9%. So 8% off of 400,000 or 405,000, you're talking what? 375. So they paid 402. They're probably going to net 375. That means they're taking a lot less than they paid for the house just a few years ago. Now, does that mean, and I'm talking out loud, tell me what you think, does that mean house prices are coming down? Maybe in some instances, certainly. And what was interesting about this wasn't a house in downtown Petoskey or Traverse City or on the water or someplace that always has a lot of demand. It was out in the country in sort of one of the more rural markets. And I genuinely wonder if some of those markets are actually going to see prices come way down. Meaning, if you're looking in one of the, East Jordan, Bel Air, Kalkaska, Mansalona, one of the more historically rural, obviously geographically rural markets, if you're going to see some of those prices come down, it'll be interesting. So I had two separate people have that happen to yesterday. So Frank V is weighing in. If you want to buy a house up here, try to get your realtor to check the houses on both sides. If they run out during the summer, my friend found out the hard way down the street, crazy parties. Frank V comes on every week and we love it, and tells us the wild stories about the renters around his area. So Frank, super glad to have you. Keep the stories coming, because I think you add more entertainment to the live sometimes than I do. So yeah, no, look, we're gonna talk about this tonight because we're gonna talk about buyer horror stories. And I was thinking about this when Candace and I were putting this together, and I thought, man, this is a really tough topic for a group of people that are trying to get people to buy houses here. But it's a lot of these buyer horror stories that we're going to talk about tonight could have easily been prevented if you had a good realtor, good home inspector, and just did some due diligence. So Frank's advice, look, I'm a huge fan of, I think the buying, and thanks for bringing that up, Frank. I think the buyer process, I think it's in depth. I think this is a little bit of a soapbox. I think real estate agents are paid a lot of money for what they do. And specifically, whether it's a buyer or seller, but most of you here are probably considering buying or selling a house. Um, Make sure you're checking everything. Make sure you're checking what's going on across the street. Make sure you're checking the neighborhood. Make sure you're checking houses down the street, because whether you like it or not, the quality of the houses around you affect the value of your home. So I wholeheartedly agree with Frank. Um, Cutesy says, truth, my neighbor has a dog that barks 24/7. Yeah. I mean, that is one thing. And I was doing video tours for, we do a lot of video tours for clients because we have a lot of people relocating here. They're coming from a long ways away. And they're relocating here, coming from a long ways away. And especially the winter, it's just hard for them to get here to look at one house. And unfortunately, I get people that want to come here and look at 4 or 5 houses at a time. And maybe that day's coming. But as of right now, that's just not how the story goes. Meaning there's rarely 5 houses in your price range that meet your criteria that you can look at any one given time. Now, maybe that will change, but the virtual tour, I just did one today before this call. Make sure you ask your realtor, are there any weird smells? Are there any things that, and it gets somebody you trust, whether it's us or another realtor, make sure you trust this person and make sure they've got a track record and good reviews, because it's very easy to, pull the wool over somebody's eyes if they're buying a house virtually, but you're going to get that deal one time and that client's never going to use you again. And that's just not the way I want to go through my career. So make sure if you're buying a house sight unseen, which QC just said, we bought our house sight unseen though, which is fine. I would probably buy a house in sight unseen. I've had a lot of people buy houses. I've had people buy $2 million houses sight unseen. Just make sure you know 100% what you're getting into, or have the ability to overcome that if you have a little bit. Look, I've had people buy houses sight unseen because they did the inspection, they got the report, they felt like they had seen enough, they knew the area. Or, look, I've had people go buy a house sight unseen because they've been in the house before, or any number of things. But if you're buying a house sight unseen, make sure you're doing your due diligence, because whether we like it or not, and our job is to market properties, sometimes the pictures on Zillow are a little bit nicer than the house is in person. Now, we never try to do that, but it's really hard with pictures, even video, to get the spatial feel or get how big this room is, or this picture makes the room look like it's huge because they use a different lens or different scope or different whatever. And the house is actually a lot smaller. So just make sure that you're getting, we've had a lot of luck with virtual tours, but make sure you're getting a full feel of what's going on. This is another interesting statistic I saw. A record percent of people, and this is what I was talking about in the start of the show, a record percent of people are planning to buy a home this year, meaning back in 2020, it was 9. It's really held steady between 9 and 11% for the last 5 years. This year, 15% of the population thinks they're buying a house, which is 50% more than 2 years ago. So 50% more people are going to try to buy a house. 50% more people are trying to buy a house this year with way less inventory. So that is definitely something to take into account. If you're thinking about buying a house this year, certainly don't want to scare you. Just, I'm here to give you the honest truth. It could be tricky. It could be a little bit more difficult this year with people coming out of the woodwork. We all want the interest rates to drop drastically. Of course, I do. You do. If those interest rates were to drop drastically right now with the limited inventory that we had, we'd have the same issue that we had in 2020 when prices skyrocketed. So it's not up to me. I'm just a real estate agent, but my guess is the people that are in charge of mortgage rates, the market is really trying to slowly ease into this. That way we can try to find a balance from, where home prices used to be versus what they are now. Because I think I've always been interested if home prices before the pandemic in Northern Michigan were just artificially inflated, or if they were just undervalued. And it seems like right now, with so much buyer demand and yet not a lot of properties still selling right now. Now, of course, the spring and summer could change this. If the prices in Northern Michigan are starting to find their equilibrium, I do think it's nice that we're not in San Francisco or Florida where prices have wild swings one way or the other. I do think our market here is a little bit more stable than a lot of places. But a lot of the reasons that caused prices to go up in Northern Michigan have sort of subsided. Number one, interest rates, first and foremost, they're never going to be as low as they were then. A lot of people that were able to work remotely have chosen to do so from Northern Michigan. The remote work, from what I'm hearing, and if anybody hears differently, make sure you drop a comment below. It seems like a lot of people are calling their employees back to work, and or there's not as much remote work being offered because there's a lot of layoffs. Also, interestingly enough, because this was a hot button topic for a lot of years, it seems like the short-term rental market has sort of taken care of itself. We don't hear about it nearly as much. There was a wild run of them back when COVID first hit, and a lot of those people have sold or are currently selling. It turned out that short-term rentals are more of a hobby or a very low-paying side job. Now, I own a short-term rental management company, and we've definitely noticed a downtick in people wanting to buy a home for short-term rental. For one, the prices are super high. Prices are super high. Interest rates are super high. That arbitrage based on it costs me, $300 a day to own this house. I rent it out for $310 a day, and those numbers just don't make sense. I do still think if you wanted to go this route, I'm a huge fan of the vacation hacking philosophy, which is you buy a house, short-term rent it to subsidize the cost of you owning a house or you owning a second home. And look, I've had people able to buy bigger vacation homes because they're going to rent it out and they were only going to use it 10 days a year anyways, or 20 days a year anyway. And they feel like, hey, look, if we just rent it out versus letting it sit empty, we can actually buy a bigger house and we can still enjoy it. It'll appreciate, it'll work out great for us. So I definitely think that short-term rentals are more of a good way to subsidize your house, pay for some of the taxes versus, I get calls, good news, bad news. I get calls, not so much anymore, but for a long time, I would get a call for somebody that wants to buy $1 million house on Burt Lake and rent it out and cash flow it. And I told that person, I said, if that was possible, everybody would be doing it because, I would do it. I'd love to have somebody, I'd love to buy a house on Burt Lake and then pay, let somebody else pay it off. And then one day have a free house. So that was possible here once upon a time. And that is just not the case anymore. And we'll see, maybe it'll come back. But as of right now, it feels like the short term, look, we don't have as many under management as we had at one point. We're at about half. And a lot of those people either sold them, decided to keep them themselves. And for one reason or another, just decided that short-term rentals were not for them. And also there's, with the economy being what the economy is right now and everything costing so much and eggs being so expensive, that a lot of people, a market did what a market did. There was an oversupply. If you have more supply than you do demand, it causes the prices to go down. If you have more demand than you do have supply, it causes the prices to go up. It's what you learned in college, Econ 101, and it certainly holds true. Jeff says, happens all the time with pictures. Definitely a way to do this. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of you have to rely on virtual tours for buying a house or purchasing the internet. Just make sure if you can't see the house in person that, you've got an honest realtor that's going to tell you the truth. And I would rather go through the house and tell you that, hey, the window's cracked versus you finding out on the home inspection or finding out. I actually, when I'm virtual touring a house for somebody, I go above and beyond because my biggest nightmare is I sell you this house and you get to the first night and you're mad at me because that is just not, I would rather not sell a house than have that happen. So thanks, Jeff, as always. Frank V, we have a lot of houses up here that are on plats. Make sure you survey the property. Yeah. We do have, so when you say plats, Frank, wait, I think I know what you mean, but in case I don't, or in case somebody doesn't know what that means, can you weigh in on what that means while I respond? Yeah, I'm a huge fan of having houses surveyed. Now, a lot of houses that are in subdivisions, which are platted subdivisions, meaning somebody already surveyed them to make them a subdivision, that's probably okay. I'm a huge fan of some states. Look, Michigan's not one of them. Some states require you to have a survey every single time the property changes hands. And if you're walking on the property, I can't tell you this has happened to me 100 times. If you're walking on the property and somebody's got a fence or they put a shed up or crosses the boundary, that's an encroachment and that could stop you from getting clear title. Make sure you have that checked out. And another thing, speaking of surveys, again, this is why I like to do the lives because we've been talking for 20 minutes and we haven't even gotten to the topic yet, which is great. The survey can tell you a lot of things. It can show your boundaries, which is always helpful. It can also show you any utility easements, any driveway easements, I think easements being found on a survey are just as important or equally as important as knowing where your lot lines are. So yeah, Frank, I'm going to wait for you to weigh back in on that and answer Ian's question. Saw charts today that cited the average consumer expect rates expects to end the year around 6.5. If we see them fall further, we'll surely see that 50%. Yeah, 100%. This is my 22nd or 23rd year of selling real estate. I'm not saying this to get you to keep watching my videos. I think this is going to be the most interesting year of my career. I was very young when in 2008, I was very young in real estate. I only been doing it a couple of years when the mortgage crisis hit and the subprime lending hit. And I don't think I knew enough to know what I was looking at. I would have bought every single house I could get my hands on. But this time around, I'm certainly a lot more savvy, and we study this stuff closely. And we're watching the metrics, and we're watching the data. I am genuinely curious what happens in the next 30, 60. So 30 days would put us April, May. By Memorial Day, June, we're going to know what this year is going to look like. And we've been very fortunate, but it is off to a bumpy start. I talked to a realtor at another brokerage in another town that I know fairly well who has made $0 this year. And I feel for the kid. Certainly offer to help him in any way I can, but the market has been very slow, and we've been lucky to help a number of you and help a number of other people in Northern Michigan. But this has been this year, whether you're a realtor, whether you're a buyer, even whether you're a seller, this is not for the faint of heart. So make sure if you're entering the market, put your helmet on and go to work every day, because I think there's going to be a lot of houses for sale. I think there's going to be some deals to be had, but I do think you're going to have to treat this like a full-time job if you're trying to buy a house. Several houses in an area where it's difficult to see property loans. Yeah. Look, there are certainly a handful of things you should consider doing anytime you're going to buy a house. And look, if you're a seller, if you're watching this because you're thinking about selling your house, if it's in Northern Michigan, I'd love to help you. If it's not, I'd love to give you free advice. Make sure you do things like a pre-home inspection. That way, you know what's wrong with the house before. And I wasn't planning on talking about this, but this is a good conversation. Make sure you do a pre-home inspection, pre-listing home inspection, because I equate it to knowing the answers to the test before you take the test. And no repair in a house is as expensive as it is when a buyer finds it during a home inspection. And they're going to turn that $15 GFCI repair into a $3,000 repair request, because people are people, and they mean well, and that's just how it goes. Also, I think when you do the pre-home inspection, it also shows the buyers that you actually care about the house. I think it sets a good tone. Also, have a survey done. It's a great tool. It's a great tool for marketing your home, because the more information you can give a buyer, the better. We're never wondering, where the property lines are there any easements, that sort of thing. Ian says, I was surprised when we moved back home. Yeah. And look, a lot of these houses have been here forever, and they were split years and years ago. I'd say probably a quarter of I just had a listing appointment tonight, and the guy handed me a survey. A lot of properties have surveys here. If you don't have a survey of your property, I would tell you spend $1,000 and get one, just so you have it. I mean, there's no downside. Get it staked. You never know when you're going to sell your house, and it's a lot easier to just have it than have to wait 2-3 months for the surveyor to come out when they're busy. So absolutely good advice, Frank and Ian. All right. Without further ado, I don't want to carry you guys over too much tonight, although I could talk to you all night, and certainly will be okay with that. We're going to talk about a couple of buyer horror stories. Now, I don't let this scare you. These are things that could have been easily avoided, but they're also just a reality check of some of the things we run into when selling houses in Northern Michigan, or really anywhere. So let me see this comment is real quick. Yes, when we sold our home, we repaired everything we consider minor and brought everything up to code. Yes, that's the 100% the way to do it. And that's probably, I'm not sure, but that's probably why you got top dollar for your house, because those things matter. I hope these are comical horror stories. You tell me. Some of them are funny, some of them are not so funny. So, all right, let me get into it. As always, if any questions come up, if you're hopping on late, my name is Gino D'Angelo. I'm a local Northern Michigan realtor. I do these every Thursday at 7:00. I release a new video every Sunday at 1 p.m. Hit the subscribe button. Make sure you never miss a video. We have some cool videos coming up. We're really investing a lot of time, money. I was actually talking to somebody the other day. You think this is just me behind the camera, but if you knew what went into these lives, what goes into the videos, I have an entire team behind me to make what ends up being a 10-minute video that we post on Sunday. So this is not a low effort production. I'm super grateful to have the guys and girls that I have working with me. on these videos. And I take this seriously. I want to make the best videos in Northern Michigan. That way you can watch these, and whether you call me or call somebody else or move somewhere else, at least I'll sleep well at night knowing that you had as much information about buying a home in Northern Michigan as possible. So again, drop a comment, whether you're watching it live or the recording. If you drop a comment now, I'll respond to it live. If you drop a comment later, I'll respond to it when I see it. If you're watching this in the recording and you want to make sure you don't miss the live videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn the bell on. So let's get into it. The hidden structural disaster. A family bought an old charming cottage near Torch Lake, only to find out months later that the foundation was crumbling and it cost them $100,000. Now, I don't have any of the backstory. These are just stories we sourced. Some of these, there's a couple in here. I'm not going to tell you which ones. A couple of these are ours, but this one's not. That is a buyer horror story that could have easily been solved by one of two things. One, I actually hope they didn't have a home inspection, because if they did and the home inspector missed that, then that is 100% the home inspector's fault. Number two, if you have a home inspection and the foundation is iffy at all, you can get what's called a structural engineer. And there's a couple of them in Michigan. They cover the whole state. There's a couple in Northern Michigan, and they will come into the house and tell you exactly what is wrong with the foundation and what it costs to fix. And I don't think they charge for estimates. So there is no excuse. If you're buying a house and you're at all, I'll tell you this, go in stages. If you see a house, if you buy a house and it's an old house, or there's some reason you're worried about the foundation, have the home inspector look at it. He is going to tell you if you need the specialist. It's like going to your family doctor to see if whatever's wrong with you is actually a big deal or a little deal. And he will tell you, because they want to pass the blame. The home inspector does not want to stamp something with their initials or their name and say, this is fine. And turns out it wasn't. So if they're at all worried, they're going to tell you to get a second opinion. And I wholeheartedly support that, because two things. One, I want you to be happy with your house, because these are major purchases. And I think a lot of the fun has been taken out of the process. And I want you to have some glimmer of happiness at the end of the day. And also, when you call me to sell in a couple of years, I don't want to sell a house that has a crumbling foundation. So that too. Number two, I almost did not want to put this one on here because it is one of those phobias that people have in Northern Michigan. And I want to say, so this one's not mine. This one didn't happen to us either, but it's a story we found. The well runs dry. A couple purchased a rural home outside of Petoskey, didn't realize the property had an aging well with a low water capacity. A few months in, they ran out of water and had to drill a new well, a $15,000 surprise expense. Okay, like this actually was ours. I just remember the story. It wasn't mine, but it was an agent on my team who sold a house outside of Petoskey. Luckily, so that first deal fell apart. Luckily, the neighbor who did have a well bought it and just connected the house to his well. So that was a very fortunate situation, because, and I remember the story now, that house was built in a really precarious area, because I've never heard of a house in Petoskey having a well that ran dry, but I remember that story. So that one was one of ours. It wasn't one of mine, but it was somebody on my team at the time. Septic system nightmares. We're going to cause, these are all the things, good news, bad news. The first three, and I can see the next one. The first, these are all, this is going to be a good video, because these are all issues that people bring up that I tell them never happen, but this is a good way to tell that they once in a while do happen. So septic system nightmare. A buyer in Charlevoix moved into their dream home only to discover the septic was failing. The previous owner had forgotten to mention recent backups, and now the buyer was stuck with a $20,000 replacement bill. Guys, we talk about well and septics in Northern Michigan. If you're moving here from a more urban area, you're probably not used to them. You have to get the well and septic inspected, specifically the well. And one thing I like to recommend is when somebody buys a house that's on a well, that you should have, or that's on a septic, you should have the septic pump, because it's not your crap, for a lack of a better term. And also, when you get the septic pumped, that's also a good indication whether there's something wrong with the septic or not. Also, there's another lesson lost in this story, and that's to make sure I would imagine everybody watching this is honest. I'm honest. I try to be honest. I hope all of you try to do the same. The seller's disclosure is what a seller fills out when they go to list and sell their home, that tells, and this is a very legal document that tells exactly what is wrong with the home. There's a question on there, surprisingly enough, that asks the condition of the septic. If you put good on there and you find out that the septic has been backing up, you are probably going to find yourself in court. which not only will you have to probably pay to fix the septic, you'll have to pay for your lawyer to fight about you fixing the septic. So be honest, tell the truth. That's something that just get it fixed. If you're going to sell your house, you want to make sure you transfer it in good condition. Or look, if you are in a situation where you don't have any money or you don't have a lot of money, you can't afford it, then you're going to have to lower your price. Somehow you have to compensate for stuff like that because that is a big deal. Frozen pipes. Now, this is a lot more common in northern Michigan. Very few wells run dry. Very few foundations are crumbling that aren't caught during the process, and very few septic systems fail. Many people have their pipes freeze. So a winter home purchased in Boyne City turned disastrous when the new owner arrived to find the pipes had burst to a heating system failure. The repairs were extensive and insurance only covered part of the cost. A couple of things about this. One, make sure the same way you need a good real estate agent, a good lender, you need a good insurance agent. We have a great one. His name is Chris Kylene. I keep begging him to come on the live because I think he'd give you a lot of useful information, but for whatever reason, he's camera shy. So he's a much better insurance guy than he is a public speaker. So I'm going to shame him into coming on because there are some things that you need to know about homes in northern Michigan. Like if you're not going to be here in the wintertime and you're going to keep the house not winterized, meaning the pipes aren't blown out, they could freeze, and you want to make sure you have a system set up to either prevent that from happening, and then also make sure you have insurance in case it does. Because there was a house. It's not just old houses. There was a beautiful house in Bay Harbor years and years ago that I'll never forget, that an agent that was in the office I was in at the time had listed, and the pipes burst and froze. And it was like a scene out of Frozen. The entire house was frozen. Like the pipes had exploded, leaked everywhere, and froze. And their entire interior was covered in ice. Now, that wasn't my client. I don't remember what happened, but that had to be a significant bill for a house on Vista Drive in Bay Harbor to have frozen pipes. Beachfront battle. This is an odd one. A buyer in Harbor Springs thought they were getting a private stretch of lakefront property until a neighbor claimed historical access. A legal battle ensued, costing tens of thousands in legal fees, and the person did have historical access. We talked about this last week. One thing to keep in mind is there is such a thing called riparian rights, which means if you live on the Great Lakes, and my guess is if this was on, it was in Harbor Springs. My guess was it was on the Great Lakes. If you have a 10,000 square foot, $20 million house in Harbor Springs, and there's a way for people to walk on the beach in front of your house, they are absolutely allowed to. And that's something that surprises people. I told the story last week about how I was listing a very significant piece of property on the west end of Bay Harbor a number of years ago. And Bay Harbor's right on the water, very high end community. But Bay Harbor is sort of bookend by East Park on the east side, West Park on, you guessed it, the west side. So this house was in the preserve, or this piece of property was in this preserve, and it was so close to the western border of Bay Harbor, people could go down Town Line Road, get into the water, and walk in front of this property. Now, the seller wanted us to market this as the most private property in northern Michigan, and you could build a private estate here. And we sort of had to tell them, we can't really do that because it's not super private when everybody can walk from 100 feet away from West Park onto your property, onto your shoreline, and walk in front of your, whatever house you're going to build on this very expensive lot. So something that's unique to Michigan. And my guess is it's probably the same in other states bordering the Great Lakes. But in the lake, Torch Lake, Walloon Lake, Mullet Lake, Burt Lake, you own to the water. Nobody can walk in front of your property without your permission. On the Great Lakes, everybody has the right to traverse it. So something to keep in mind when buying a waterfront property in northern Michigan. Now, again, a lot of properties don't have, I don't want to scare anybody that's afraid that they're going to buy a house in Harbor Springs or Charlevoix or Petoskey on the water and everybody's going to be walking in front of their house. If it's hard to get there, they're not going to. If you're up in Goodhart or the Tunnel of Trees, there's no real easy way to get to that beach unless somebody walks 10, 15 miles through the sand. And if they want to do that, then they can walk in front of your house, I guess. But, just something to keep in mind. HOA horror stories. I just had this comment with somebody. I just had this conversation. We have very, if you look at some of the HOAs, like we'll say, obviously Bay Harbor, Crooked Tree, Boyne Highlands, Boyne Mountains, some of the more not popular, but some of the bigger HOAs, there are going to be very stringent guidelines there. A lot of the HOAs in northern Michigan, and this surprises people, are literally just, you pay a couple $100 and they plow your road, or you pay a couple $100 and they maintain the sign at the beginning of the road, or, there's some loose rules, like you can't park a boat in your yard, but everybody has boats in their yard. So we don't really have any bad HOA issues. I've only heard of a couple instances of people having issues with their HOA, and those occasions are just with some overzealous people who moved to Northern Michigan that have decided to make it their priority to hassle people that live in their neighborhood, and then they've chosen to do so. But by and large, HOAs are not scary here. And in fact, I kind of like them because I used to live in a subdivision that didn't have an HOA. And there were times when I wished there was some way to get my neighbors to cut the grass or not have piles of firewood in their driveway. But that's a different story for a different day. So here goes the HOA story. A condo buyer in Traverse City there's a lesson to be learned on this one. A condo buyer in Traverse City didn't fully read the HOA rules before closing. They later found out about excessive restrictions. Here we go. I just told you that we don't have a lot of excessive restrictions in Northern Michigan, but there's one in Traverse City. High fees and an unfriendly board that made every little improvement a nightmare. Okay, first of all, the fees shouldn't have been a surprise. Those should be disclosed and you should know what you're getting into. And it's not just the fees. Look, a lot of people, the wrong question to ask is, what are the HOA fees? That's a bad question. The right question is, that's the wrong question. Not a bad question, it's the wrong question. The right question is, what are the HOA fees and what do I get for it? Because if I told you the HOA was $500 a month, you might tell me, wow, that's incredibly expensive. Now, what if I told you they cut your grass, you get a pool, they shovel your stoop, they plow the snow, they wash your windows, whatever they do. Now, suddenly that $500 isn't so bad. So I really think the HOA cost is more of a question of value. Look, if you're budget conscious and you're like, I don't want any amenities, I'm not paying 1 cent more than I have to, then an HOA isn't right for you. But there are some HOAs in Northern Michigan. I think some are incredibly expensive. I think some you get a lot of value for your buck. And a lot of our HOAs outside of the really high end areas are really affordable typically. Even Crooked Tree, which is a great golf course community, I want to say there's like $800 a year, and that's a beautiful area. And they've got well-kept roads, manicured lawns, and everything's great. So make sure you know what you're getting into with the HOAs. Read the bylaws. A lot of them are cookie cutter, boilerplate. But don't hesitate to talk to the treasurer, talk to the president of the HOA. Make sure you know what you're getting into. And that starts with checking out the town, checking out the house with the inspector, checking out the HOA by talking to the president. Just have a very good understanding of what you're buying into. That way there are no surprises after closing, because I can't think of anything more stressful than buying a house. And I've heard horror stories, and it's not one of these tonight, but I've heard different horror stories about people who have bought houses and been extremely disappointed with what happened after. And I often wonder how many of those things could have been prevented by just paying a little bit closer attention. Michigan HOAs are pretty uniquely given our site condo building class. Many HOAs exist. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I don't know how to look up the statistic. I wish I could. I'd venture to guess most HOAs in Northern Michigan are more for plowing the roads than they are for telling you can't build a fence. So no, that's a good comment. The next one is the moldy mess. A family buying a move-in ready home near Elk Rapids discovered black mold hidden behind new painted drywall. The seller had concealed past water damage, and the mold remediation cost $30,000. That's another really unfortunate story. And I'd like to say I've dealt with so few people that were this level of dishonest. This is the lesson I wish I would have structured. We've ended up doing it this way anyways, but I wish I would have structured this to tell you the story and to tell you how I would have made sure that didn't happen, or how I will make sure that doesn't happen for you. And this happened recently. If you're looking at a house, and it's not uncommon if somebody's selling their house for them to have boxes everywhere and for them to be moving, make sure if they're against a wall or there's big furniture against the wall. I don't think anybody would necessarily do this intentionally, but make sure you move that stuff away from the wall, because the first thing the inspector is going to say, look, they're only there for a couple hours. You're paying them a few $100. They're not going to move a bunch of boxes away from the wall, whether you want them to or not. And then there's a level of liability that they don't want to be moving stuff around. Make sure you check everything. And that hutch against the garage wall might have mold behind it. And that's one of those things where if you just take a little bit more time and look, you could have saved yourself $30,000, because houses are expensive, and some of these issues, whether you're talking about mold or water damage or anything of the like, they just become extremely expensive. The short-term trap. A couple bought a beautiful home in downtown Traverse City, planning to rent it out on Airbnb to offset their mortgage. After closing, they learned the city had strict short-term rental regulations and the property wasn't eligible. Who are these? Who are you guys? These horror stories. Who are they hiring for real estate agents? It seems like they're just doing. Maybe they're just doing it themselves. Their investment plan crumbled, leaving them stuck with an affordable second home. If you want to short-term rent your house, make sure you ask if you can short-term rent your house, because that is could be that story. That wasn't one of our situations either. That could have been catastrophic if. Now, luckily, we own a short-term rental management company, so we're pretty dialed into where you can and can't. You got to find out if you're thinking about short-term renting the house. I wouldn't even look. Ask your agent; they can do the research. I would call directly myself. We're happy to do it for you, but I'd want to hear with my own 2 years that I'm able to rent this house if I'm buying it solely to rent this house. Number 9, the year-round cabin that wasn't. Excited to embrace Northern Michigan winters, a downstate couple purchased a year-round log cabin near Boyne Highlands. When temperatures dropped, they realized the home had poor insulation, a failing furnace, and frozen pipes. They ended up spending tens of thousands just to make it livable for the winter. I would have solved this in one of two ways. One, have a home inspector look at the house, and they'll tell you how many inches of inches of insulation are in the attic. Also, ask for utility bills, because if somebody is using this house year round or claiming it to be year round, they're going to have winter heating costs, and the proof will be in the pudding. If the heating costs in the winter are astronomical, then the house has poor insulation. So definitely, if you want a cabin or a cottage or something that looks like a cabin or cottage and you want to use that year round, make sure that you are verifying that house can handle the winter months. And look, we're in the middle of it right now, or not the middle of it, we're in the end of it. But this winter has been harsh, and it took a pretty, if you had a cottage, it better be winterized to make sure it was going to withstand this winter and let you enjoy the house. The unplowed disaster. A family moving to a rural property near Harbor Springs discovered their first winter that their long scenic driveway wasn't included in county plowing service. A few heavy snowfalls later, they were stranded, forced to hire a private plowing service at an outrageous cost. Yeah, if you're buying in a rural area or you live on a seasonal road or anything like that, make sure you know how the snow is being removed. This wasn't us again. This is a one-off story, but I could see how this would happen. Make sure you know if that road is plowed that you're trying to buy on. The bait and switch acreage. A buyer thought they were purchasing a wooded 10 acres near Torch Lake, only to find out after closing that part of the land was actually owned by a neighbor. The real estate listing had misleading boundaries, and a costly legal battle ensued. We actually had this happen. So this was not me, but I think if you Google it, I don't know if it's still out there. This actually so the National Association of Realtors sends out a magazine like every quarter. This story in rural Petoskey happened that made the National Realtor magazine. There was a house in Petoskey. I'll never forget this. It was a friend of mine. It was not me. Actually, it was two friends of mine, and they were friends. And I think this put a damper on their friendship. The listing agent had a house listed with a lot next door, marketed that way, house lot included. Between the time they listed the house and then sold it, that owner sold the lot to somebody else. The new buyer didn't change the MLS or something. I think this is forever ago. That's how the story goes. The new buyer comes in, buys the house and the lot, thinking they're buying the house and the lot because it was still marketed that way, only to find out later after closing that lot had been sold prior. I don't remember what happened, but I know it was a pretty serious legal battle, and the story was gregarious enough to make it to the National Association of Realtor national publication from a very small town. I'm going to look into what happened to that after this, because I genuinely don't remember. I know exactly where the house is, but again, make sure this is something we are diligent about. There's what's called a tax ID number. So if you have a house in a subdivision in the lot next door, you likely could combine those for one tax ID number. If they're two separate lots, you need to make sure that those two separate tax ID numbers make it to the purchase agreement and the title insurance. That way you are getting both houses and they're both parcels. And that is something we pay close attention to, because that's an easy one to miss. And that just takes a little bit of of paying attention to make sure that both of the properties that you are purchasing are included. And that's something, if you don't buy a lot of houses or you don't necessarily know, you might just take the seller's word for it. You need to make sure that if you're buying a house with 2 lots that you are getting, or more lots, 3, 4, whatever, that you make sure that you're getting every single thing that you think you're paying for. The marina fee surprise. A retiree bought a waterfront condo in Charlevoix, excited for a boat slip in the community's marina. After closing, they discovered an additional $15,000 in annual fees that they hadn't taken into consideration. So not only do you have to worry about annual fees when you're buying in an HOA, also ask if there's any upcoming assessments. Now this is negotiable to an extent. If there are any current assessments, the seller is supposed to pay for those prior to closing. Now you can negotiate where maybe you get the house for a less price and you pay them, or some variation of that. But in our purchase agreement, it says that the seller will pay for any current outstanding utility assessments or anything of that nature. Make sure you know, I sold a house on the Sheboygan River last year, and I discovered this for the buyer, but they were about to pave the road. Now, the road had been dirt forever. For whatever reason, everybody on the road voted that they wanted to pave it. That meant that every owner had to pay for it going forward. Now, this wasn't going to start until a couple of months after my buyer was going to buy this house. So I had to make sure they understood that, look, it's not there today, but in a couple of months, you're going to get an assessment for this paved road. And luckily enough, they thought, look, I'm happy to have a paved road, so I don't necessarily care as much about the assessment as I might otherwise. So they were just like, look, I'm glad to pay a portion to have this road paved so my sports car doesn't get stuck when I go down the driveway. Bats in the attic. One of my least favorite things in the world are bats in an attic. A couple in Petoskey thought they had found a peaceful home in the woods until they realized they were sharing with a colony of bats in the attic and a family of raccoons in the crawl space. The removal cleanup cost nearly $10,000. I'm not afraid of very many things. One of the things I'm afraid of are bats. I don't know why I'm afraid of them. I think they're weird. They're small. I understand they don't really hurt you. One of my first summer jobs was in Mackinac City, and that's right on the water, and they had a tremendous amount of bats. And I don't know. I just think they're weird. They're like rats with wings, and they can get into small places. So again, make sure that you check the attic, the crawl space, everything of that nature. That way, hopefully it's just your family living there and not a raccoon and a bunch of bats. The insurance shocker. A lakefront home buyer near Burt Lake was thrilled with their deal until they tried to get homeowners insurance. Due to previous flooding history, the insurance premiums were over $8,000 per year, far beyond their budget. That is why you want to talk to Chris Kylene, who won't come on our show, about home insurance and get a quote prior to moving in. During the mortgage process, as part of qualifying, you're going to have to provide them a estimate of what your insurance is going to be. The insurance company will go back and look at the house and give you a rating, because look, I've learned this is why I want to have Chris on. I've learned a couple of things, that proximity to a fire station, proximity to a fire hydrant, those things affect the cost of insuring a house. So make sure that not only are you talking to the real estate agent, your loan officer, but also keeping your insurance guy in the loop a little bit. That way they give you a recommendation and tell you exactly what you're getting into, because home insurance could cost $80 a month. It could cost $200 a month. It could cost $300 a month. You really need to, and there's some factors that go into it. Does it have a wood stove? How old's the roof? Are there trees next to it? Make sure you talk to a qualified insurance agent before you make any purchases. Old wiring fire. This doesn't happen as much. Actually, this is really funny, because when this again wasn't one of ours, but I remember this happened. They actually thought, this was when Teslas became fairly popular, and they thought this house burned down because the electric car in the garage exploded. And I think they determined that it was just bad wiring. So the story goes, a buyer fell in love with a historic home in downtown Petoskey, but didn't realize the electric system hadn't been updated in decades. After a small electrical fire, they had to rewire the entire house, costing $50,000. Now the story goes, I remember when this happened, the fire started in the garage, and they thought that it was the electric car. Maybe they were hoping it was electric car back then. I guess Elon was a lot less scrutinized back in the day than he is today. But anyways, it was not the electric car. It was the electrical bad electrical. So that is the last of the buyer horror stories. I have more and more I can go into, but I thought 15 was enough for tonight. The big takeaways are just do your due diligence. And one thing I've learned over my 22 year real estate career is if you ignore something or don't pay attention to an issue, it almost always comes back to bite you later. So make sure you're getting a home inspection. Make sure you're checking everything out. And look, I don't get annoyed. Some agents get annoyed when buyers take it to the next level about investigating stuff. I want you to investigate everything as thoroughly as possible, because if I don't sell you that house, I'm going to sell you the next house. And I'd rather you buy a house that you're comfortable with and know exactly what you're getting into. And we've got a bunch of them. There's a lot of great home inspectors in Northern Michigan that will do a good job for you. And they come to the house and they'll spend 2 or 3 hours. You're going to spend $600 or $700. They're going to give you a 50 or 60 page report, and you're going to know exactly what's going on with that house at that point in time when you buy it. What's also nice is when you have that home inspection, if you go to sell the house and 2 or 3 years later, you can compare the two. You can say what has changed since then, what has not changed. And just being able to show that history to the buyer sometimes shows, yeah, this house was slanting 5 years ago. It's still slanting at the same pitch, not the house, the floor. It's still slanting at the same pitch it was, when we started. So those are just good things to have. Make sure you're checking on the HOA docs. Make sure if you want to buy a house in the country and you want to have chickens in your backyard, call the township and make sure you can have chickens in your backyard. How does the saying go? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That is never more true than in real estate, because these are significant purchases. For a lot of you, it's the biggest investment you'll ever make. And with as expensive as houses are in the areas I cover, you want to make sure that your $500,000, $250,000, $750,000, $2 million purchase is as safe as it possibly can be. And I'm 100% here to guide you through that. So I'm going to answer Frank's question. And while I do, we're going to hop off here shortly. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. I'll give you a little bit of insight of what we're looking at going forward. But Frank V says, bats are everywhere up here. I fish at night and they swarm my head to eat the bugs by me. I think bats are cool, especially the way they fly erratically. So I believe I'm true, and somebody can correct me if I'm not, but bats fly by sound, not by sight. And I agree. The thing with bats, and again, last week we were talking about Italian food. Today we're talking about bats. So the beauty of doing lives, we need the bats in Northern Michigan, because without the bats, it would be a lot more buggy. And I would rather trade being afraid of the bats than eaten by the bugs. So I guess in a world where you have to pick the worst of two evils, then that's no. Bats have a function here. There's a ton of them. I think it surprises people how many bats there are, especially if you're on the water. Like Frank V said, fishing at night, you're probably going to encounter a lot of them. So I do know, though, this, not to scare you, not to give you one last horror story. If you get bit by a bat, it's a big deal. You have to get a series of shots, and I think it takes a long time, because those things carry diseases, and those are diseases we do not want. So absolutely. Make sure that when you're buying a house, moving into an area, look, the whole reason I started this channel, hold on a second. I have, with Frank saying, I have a light there you go. So Frank's working in tandem with the bats. He's attracting the bugs and creating somewhat of a buffet for them just to fly up to him, and the bats eat the bugs. The reason I say this all the time, the reason I started doing these videos was to educate people on buying a house in Northern Michigan. And I'm truly passionate about making sure you're as educated as possible about not only the area you're living in, the house you're living in, everything. I want you to know where the nearest hospital is, where the grocery store is, where, I had somebody come into town, and something that they mentioned that I didn't realize is making sure that the car brand that I have has a dealership in this town. I want you to move to Northern Michigan to enjoy the lifestyle that so many of us are lucky to enjoy in the most peaceful way possible. I don't want you to get here and feel like, shoot, this isn't the right area for me, or shoot, I wish I would have known this. So I will continue to make these videos to make you the most educated buyer as possible. If you need anything, feel free to drop. I'm gonna put my phone number on the screen. You can text me at any time. I often put my cell phone number up here on these lives. That is my direct cell phone, 231-330-4863. We've got a newsletter we're starting that's going to give you even more up-to-date information. We've got the videos. Follow me on social media. I've really enjoyed getting to know a lot of you, and I've been making these videos long enough now I've been doing the lives long enough that I feel like some of you that I've never met feel like friends to me. And I'm genuinely lucky to have this community, and it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger. And you guys really make me enjoy doing these lives. So without further ado, if you have any questions, reach out to me directly. If you're not yet subscribed, it would mean the world to me if you would hit that subscribe button, share with a friend, help me build this great community so I can keep making better and better videos. And with that being said, have a good night, and I will see you next Thursday.